Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out, and there was this big, red, blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on. They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. How you guys gonna want to come film this?
Put him out.
What about? I just seen it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, Bizarre Society, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some refer to as Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch.
Who loves you and who do you love?
And alongside me, as usual, I have the one, the only, the big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix.
You're my boy, Boo!
Daddy!
That one was so good, I figured I just had to carry it on a little bit from Bizarre Inquiries last week and make sure that I just did a little bit of an extension to it.
I was going to say,
I feel like that's one I might play with for a little while.
You added on to it. I wasn't expecting the sequel there at the end. So
I was almost thinking about dragging out the boy part, so it would have been like, "You're my boy, Boo," and then just keep making it longer and longer. Maybe I will do something with it. I feel like it's a good one. It might stick for a while. I just got to tweak it a little bit each week to make it exciting. So here's where we are now, man. We're making it a little bit PG, making it a little bit fun still, but we still end up getting into the after dark stuff a little bit farther in the show. But at that point, maybe the kids are already asleep.
Well, and why are people letting their kids listen to the show anyway? I mean, that's just bad parenting, it seems like.
I mean, we're into some weird stuff lately. I mean, maybe back when we were doing cryptids and stuff, but it seems like lately we've been diving into a lot of like occult stuff and like deeper philosophy behind stuff and like bizarre theories and stuff. So if you're watching this with kids, I feel like most of what we're talking about is probably like way over their heads unless they're teenagers anyway. So
well, tonight's episode is definitely going to be one of those. So.
Well, we got another very exciting one next week. I'm looking forward to getting back into the swing of some of our own research. It seems like you and I have gotten some relatively new inspiration for a lot of stuff we're going to be diving into with the show. So I think we're going to have a lot of new and exciting episodes coming up. I already have something else in the works beyond the next one that I'm working on. But I guess partially moving into tonight's stuff, we, of course, have to give them news and updates. So as far as Bizarre Inquiry goes, why don't you give them some updates on that, Orin?
Yeah, so our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries, our YouTube live show, is going to be Thursday, March the 5th, roughly 7:15 Eastern Time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. You guys be sure to submit questions or videos or articles or anything that you want us to inquire about, and also join in the chat during the episode.
And if you guys would like to get in touch with us for any reason whatsoever, whether you want to be a guest on the show, share a bizarre encounter or experience, or contact us for any reason whatsoever, you guys can get a hold of us through email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com. If you guys are getting a hold of us for a more professional means, you guys can contact us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And, of course, you guys could always call or text us 24/7 right on our hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551.
And as always, all that shit is mentioned in the link tree in the show description.
And, of course, as we were mentioning, we are going to be diving into a lot of weird and new bizarre stuff on the show, pulling it away from the typical like cryptid stuff that we originally started on, as far as starting this new trend of this new inspiration of weird stuff that we've been getting into. Warren, why don't you let them know what the first piece of what we're getting into tonight is?
Okay, so tonight's episode is going to be something a little different than normal. Instead of like deep diving into one specific topic, we're going to kind of touch on several different and interrelated topics. And what all these topics kind of have in common is they suggest that our timeline and world history have been purposefully forged or misrepresented. And in a lot of these cases, hundreds of years worth of time has been like artificially added to our calendar. and we are not actually living in the year 2026. Dun, dun, dun.
Reality is illusion.
As you said, reality is an illusion.
Yes. So some of the topics we're going to kind of touch on tonight are Phantom Time, New Chronology, Tartaria, which for some reason we haven't really talked about on the show.
Surprisingly, I mean, we've kind of scraped by it a couple times. We've mentioned it, but yeah, we haven't actually like hit it.
And the one I'm most excited to talk about is the little season concept or theory. So kind of should go without saying, but all these topics are really vast, broad topics. Each of them could be their own episode or even their own series in some cases. So this episode's kind of intended to just be like an introduction to each of these concepts and to kind of give us a jumping off point and a point to start conversation. So with that being said, Shane, do you have anything before I jump into Phantom Time?
Just a quick comment on Tartaria. Of course, that's a topic that I feel like was really, really popular a couple of years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if people have like a crazy interest in it anymore, or if it's one of those things that people have kind of heard a lot about, or maybe it's kind of going to resurface a little bit. But if theoretically people did want to hear about that, shoot us a message on social media. I do have a perfect guy who ends up I've actually had on inquiries that's dived into it. So it might be something that we can put together sooner rather than later, because I think we need another guest to fill in this month. So if you guys are interested, maybe we can have him on to talk about Tartaria.
All right. So unless you got anything else, I'm going to jump into Phantom Time.
Super excited. Let's hop into it, man.
All right, so the Phantom Time theory was first proposed in the 1990s by a German publisher and historian. I'm doing air quotes there.
Dun, dun, dun. Supposedly.
Yes. But anyway, this guy's name was Herbert Illig, I believe is how it would be pronounced. And this
Very strange name.
Yeah.
It doesn't look right typed.
So he was born in 1947. Strange year right off the bat. And he was born in Wohenstraub, I believe it would be pronounced, Germany. And he was a member of a group called the Society for the Reconstruction of Human and Natural History.
Already has a bunch of red flags with reconstruction of human and natural history. That's just red flags all over the name of that.
But this group supported concepts such as catastrophism, which is the theory that, quote, the Earth has largely been shaped by sudden, short-lived, violent events, possibly worldwide in scope. And also,
definitely think there's validity to that, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that one's not that out there. But they also supported the idea of historical revisionism, which was the challenging of, quote, scholarly views or narratives regarding a historical event, time span, or phenomenon by introducing contrary evidence or reinterpreting the motivations of the people involved. So again, on its surface, not a crazy concept in and of itself.
But the concept of the words twisting is the hard part about it, because of course everybody knows that history is written by the victor, so history is extremely biased to begin with. But of course you want to be able to take some of these historical events and look at it from both perspectives, such as, war events. You want to see the victor, you want to see the person that lost if you have any ability to be able to see any type of their historical record. But of course, within that, there still could be the possibility of bias from these scholarly people, because as we've talked about a million times on the show, when it comes to these scholarly type people, of course, they don't want to rewrite their the people they've learned from names out of the history books or anything like that. So there's still possibility for there being corruption within that, unfortunately, even though it sounds like a good idea on the surface.
Well, and a lot of that kind of stuff is what we're going to touch on throughout the episode. But anyway, so this Herbert Illig fella, he was also the owner of his own publishing company, and he worked as the editor for multiple scholarly journals. But in 1996, he published a book titled The Invented Middle Ages. And in this book, he theorized that the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II conspired to add roughly 297 years worth of what he called phantom time to our calendar. And basically, there's a lot of really specific, political and religious details and backstory on why this happened. But the general idea is this was done quote, to place them at the special year of AD 1000 and to rewrite history to legitimize Otto's claim to the Holy Roman Empire. So again, a lot of backstory I'm not going to get into. This isn't a history channel, but if you guys want to look into that, you can. But basically all you need to know is these guys thought by like artificially placing themselves at this special divine year of 1000 that it would give them a greater claim to the positions of power that they were seeking and were in. So that's basically all you need to know about that. They added this phantom time to basically reset the calendar to the year 1000.
I mean, you can also, even within that, you can rewrite historical events because obviously, as we've seen, it only takes like 2 generations for a historical event to start becoming something of folklore. So, theoretically, if you're looking at it from a religious standpoint, if you made 1,000-year difference within this one period, you can make it look like these events from the Bible were 1,000 years previous to when they were, for example, and make them, you can make the events look like they were something different than they actually were, because there may be people that were like, hey, wait, wasn't it something like this? And it's like, no. These were events that happened like 1,000 years ago. These weren't those events. These are something different now.
We'll keep that in mind as we progress through the episode and the various topics. But anyway, so according to Herbert Illig, some of the evidence that supported this phantom time theory was the lack of architectural artifacts that can be accurately dated to the years 614 AD through 911 AD, the surviving presence of Romanesque architecture, in Western Europe. And so, according to him, this would kind of point to the fact that these buildings were not nearly as old as we're led to believe if, Western Europe has all these basically Roman buildings still surviving. And he also pointed to the alleged over-reliance on written documentation by medieval scholars. I think this one's kind of an odd point. Written documentation seems like a pretty good way to document things, but I guess his point was there was a lot of written documentation and, according to him, not physical documentation that could be accurately dated to those time periods.
I will say, at least with a lot of the medieval writings, this has obviously been something that's fascinated me a lot with like grimoires and like a lot of like the like alchemy aspect of things. But when you start diving into these texts, prime example here, obviously a lot of people want to dive into this stuff when you start looking into like some of these older creatures, but you start looking at the way that they interpreted like elephants or lions or all of these different creatures, and you see like how ridiculous they look. And then you got to keep in mind and remember that a lot of these scholarly guys that were like writing history, that were talking about all these events, that were doing all this stuff, they weren't actually like going out and seeing these things. They were sitting within like the confines of wherever they were sitting for hours on end. They were writing, they were hearing stories from people, and they were documenting them and writing them down. So you have to take into consideration that a lot of those writings, we try to look at them like these are historically factual things that have happened, but they're interpretations from somebody playing telephone, because a lot of the time these guys that were documenting everything, again, weren't seeing these events. They weren't seeing the animals. They were getting secondhand stories from somebody else. So you can't use them as that defining hard point, because get back into the whole history thing, that history is written by the victor. So, if there was this big battle that went out and happened during medieval times, the only people that would have survived were the victors. They came back, they retold these stories to the scribes, they wrote them all down. That's the only documentation you have. So anything that's written documentation from humans, there's got to be a matter of bias, but particularly again, these guys didn't actually go and see these things.
Well, and like I said, a lot of that is basically the premise of a lot of the information in tonight's episode. So you're definitely spot on with all that. Something else that Herbert Illig pointed to was supposed discrepancies that arose with the introduction of the Gregorian calendar in the year of 1582. We're going to touch on this in just a second, but, kind of all these things combined led this guy to believe that roughly 300 years of this phantom time had been added to the calendar. Well, obviously, this concept has been heavily criticized and dismissed by experts and historians. They point to evidence.
Of course it has. Of course it has.
So evidence contradicting this theory that they point to is like proven astronomical occurrences like comets and solar eclipses and things like that supposedly line up with our accepted quote unquote calendar. Supposedly there are, a lot of architectural artifacts that can be accurately dated to the Middle Ages, despite what Illig said. And a lot of this phantom time that he proposed can largely be accounted for by, quote, the years between the institution of the Julian calendar in 45 BC and the fixing of the Easter date at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. So again, this is a lot of, really specific historical, political, religious type stuff. Basically, all you guys need to know is before like leap days and leap years and, all the mechanisms to make the calendar more accurate were added in, the date of Easter like shifted way beyond like what it was supposed to be, quote unquote. And so at this Council of Nicaea, they basically like did a hard reset and were like, okay, now, this is when Easter's going to be, and it was going to like solve a lot of these issues. So a lot of this stuff he's pointing to, opponents of this theory are saying, a lot of that can be kind of poo-pooed away by the fixing of the Easter date at the Council of Nicaea.
The calendar is such a weird concept anyways, because we've said it a million times on the show that time is simply just a human construct.
Mm-hmm.
So like the only way to really like think about time is essentially it's where our location is within like the solar system. So theoretically, like the only way you'd be able to properly document these days is to map where you are in the solar system. But I feel like there's still going to be variance within that, because I'm sure that the orbit doesn't stay exactly the same all the time. So again, it's like we're trying to get down to like the nitty gritty of this whole concept. That's again, simply just a human construct anyways.
Yeah,
like it's such a weird thing to think about.
Well, and they keep having to add these leap days and leap years and leap centuries, whatever, into the calendar to try to make it more accurate. So like you said, they're kind of trying to square peg round hole, like these, really natural, astrological things into our human constructs, and it doesn't work cleanly.
This is going to sound like a super weird thing to think about, but again, all the weird occult stuff I've been diving into, it seems like with a lot of stuff in nature, everything seems to work in these 4-week cycles. So just a weird thing to point out, when we have these weird months where we have like 5 weeks, or we have like these shortened months and everything, have you noticed that the natural cycles of things completely get mixed up? Like one of the primary examples, not to get too personal, is like my girlfriend's like time of the month, for example. Every time we have one of these weeks where we have like that extra week, it throws off like how she like documents her cycle, because again, we're trying to make this calendar work for like the human perspective on things, but that's not the way that nature works. Again, nature works in these cycles, and this is the cycles we should be following. And just the fact that we have these instances where, we have these 5-week months and it throws natural cycles of everything off until it catches back up again, like that just shows that we're not using the right type of calendar.
Well, and that kind of goes back to like they say astronauts in space, whatever, like their circadian rhythms reset, and you reset to like a different day cycle because like you're actually linked up with the moon and like real shit and not our human constructs and all this stuff.
Like again, even look at the lunar cycle. It's a 4-week cycle. Everything's a 4-week cycle. So when we have these 5-week months, that's always when shit gets messed up. And we have 2 months a year that have those 5 weeks that always ends up throwing everything off. And that's why we have to throw in leap year every 4 years and everything, is because the calendar doesn't work. So we just make it up as we go.
Well, it's one of those things like it's really fucking complicated and bizarre if you really stop and think about it. We're just so used to dealing with all this our entire lives that I don't think a lot of people stop and think how weird it really is if you stop and think about it,
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So jumping back in my opinion, like what I think the most damning piece of evidence against phantom time theory is that for this theory to be true, historical records and evidence, not just from Europe, but from like all over the world, would have to have been forged or misinterpreted or misrepresented as well. So, it's one thing if like, Rome and Europe and, the European colonies that the Roman Empire were in charge of had, this kind of contradicting history. But the example I'll use is, quote, if Charlemagne and the Carolingian dynasty were fabricated, there would have to be a corresponding fabrication of the history of the rest of Europe during this same era. The phantom time period would also encompass the life of Muhammad and the Islamic expansion into the areas of the former Western Roman Empire, as well as the history of the Tang dynasty of China and its contact with the Islamic world. So again, getting Rome, the Roman Empire, Europe, all on the same page with this stuff, that's one thing. But when you start factoring in, that Asia and the Middle East would all have to be kind of participating in this elaborate ruse, I think that's the piece of evidence that makes it the most difficult for me to wrap my head around.
I mean, again, I feel like there still could be somewhat of a possibility to it. And I'm only saying that off of the simple fact that looking at like documentation of historical figures, like a prime example here that everybody talks about, Jesus, for example.
We're going to get into that in
endless
just a second.
amounts of documentation on Jesus, yet people still had these conflicts on whether or not he was a real person or not. There's endless different, getting into more occult things. There's endless documentation of like Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth being like a person and not actually like a godly like entity, but yet we still discuss whether or not these things were actual people or they were entities or whatever. But then you get into figures that we say, yes, this person definitely existed, like Alexander the Great, or like just again any of these like historical figures that we've documented, and it's like a lot of these guys have a lot less documentation than like Jesus does, for example, but we say this person is 100% definite and this person like exists in folklore or may not have been a real person. So it's just like even these historical figures that we consider to be like actual 100% fact, like I feel like there's still a lot of like falsities that could possibly be added to this, because if we're saying that this person exists because we found 3 documents on him, why is it that we're saying this person doesn't exist when we found hundreds of documents on him? And I'm saying that, of course, there's going to be the matter of telephone. Like, my denying isn't that Jesus wasn't a real person. Like, regardless or not of what you believe, I think that he was a real existing person. But the problem, I think, is what happens is once somebody starts getting into this area where so many people start talking about them, they turn into like telephone where people are just talking about all this stuff that they did. They get into this area of folklore. And then once they hit that point, people like have a problem believing whether or not they existed. But if they keep the documentation to more, I guess you could say like more real worldly sounding things, like this person came in, they conquered this, they conquered this, they conquered this, people have a lot less of a hard time accepting the fact of, yes, 100% this person must have existed, instead of just saying, oh yeah, this person must have existed, but people may have just added some stuff to the story of this person.
Well, as we've seen already and we'll continue to see, like a lot of this stuff is heavily influenced on like political or religious agendas, I guess would be a good word, like in the current time. And so, like you said, through history in the game of telephone, a lot of those things just get accepted as fact, where, current times when this stuff was going on, a lot of it was some shady shit going on to, like we talked about earlier, to possibly just like make it where this person had more of a claim to the throne or to the papacy or something like that. So yeah, after enough time, things that might not have as much historical backing kind of just get accepted as fact and history.
And then think about how much stuff actually gets destroyed to try to back this up. Like, even going into modern times, and again, everybody has their opinions on who, like, ISIS is, and we're not even going to get into that whole conspiracy, but the whole thing with ISIS, like, maybe like 5-6 years ago, where they're in the Middle East and destroying all these ancient artifacts and all these, like, ancient ruins and all this type of stuff. Like, there's still operations happening where, one country is destroying another country's ancient history, and it's making it so that once you destroy that history, you destroy the people, you can essentially rewrite the entire history of that country at that point. And this is like still happening in the modern world. This isn't even something that's like just, kept in the past.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Not to mention the fact of all the information on the internet. People can't even believe stuff nowadays anyways. I want to throw that one in there anyways, but
well, that kind of gets back to dead internet theory and some stuff we were talking about on last week's episode, but all right, you want to take a break here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, you good?
Yep.
All right, so jumping back in, we are now going to talk about a subject called the new chronology. And this is a theory that was first proposed by a Russian mathematician named Anatoly Fomenko. And he kind of published some articles and journals and essays and things like that about this theory. But it kind of rose to prominence when he published a book series titled History, Fiction, or Science?
I love when they interject with a question.
And in these books, Fomenko proposed a radically reconstructed historical timeline that is significantly shorter than our accepted timeline. And he claimed that much of the historical record prior to the year 1600 has been largely falsified for political purposes, kind of like we were just talking about. And, not to get too deep into the weeds and all the details of this, but basically he proposes that, again, through political and religious reasons, like the Vatican and the Holy Roman Empire of Germany was responsible for kind of this misinterpretation and misrepresentation of the timeline. And he said that this was largely done to obscure evidence of a vast Russian civilization that was, technologically advanced and dominated world history prior to the 17th century. And he referred to this civilization as the Russian Horde, which is, not the most elegant name for this, advanced technological civilization. But anyway, that's what he called them.
I want to throw this in too. This was in particular the thing that I was mentioning that Ari ends up diving into, and he covers this so in depth it's not even funny. He's just spent years researching this stuff. But supposedly, just to throw this in, this guy mentions when Ari was covering it that he had a bunch of information that came out of the Kremlin that supposedly backed a bunch of this stuff up, that there was all this information that was actually being kept in the Kremlin, like a library of history. And he gets into this whole theory why, a lot of the reason why Russia's always been the enemy is because they know that they're sitting on basically all this documentation of ancient history, and they see it as an issue, which, getting into the weird stuff, people, again, Tartaria will come back around to it, but a couple of years ago, again, could be a psyop, could be something else, but if I'm not mistaken, Russia was the one that was releasing all the Tartarian maps too.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that here in just a minute, but
double-edged sword. Do they have information, or are they just psyoping us, man? Because with Russia, it could go definitely either way.
Who knows at this point? But anyway, so this Anatoly Fomenko character, in his theory, he rejects most readily accepted scientific dating methods, and this includes carbon-14 dating and even astronomical events. And he also claims that the historical records of ancient civilizations like Egypt and Greece and Rome, in fact, all describe the same civilization. So, for example, where Greece and Rome will have, the same set of gods, just with different names and very similar emperor king figures and things like that. Well, he proposes that all these things are basically describing one civilization, one set of historical events. It's basically, we talk about, we're all talking about the same thing here. It's just what we choose to call it. This guy took that to its most unlikely degree of all human history is basically telling the exact same story. They're just, different names, different locations, things like that.
I will throw in something weird to kind of throw in with this, again, with some of the research I've been diving into with the occult. It appears that, again, a lot of the philosophy that came from ancient Egypt, like the Hermetic philosophy, gets pushed into Greek philosophy. So just simply off of that, one of the main things I might end up covering in the episode is that Thoth and Hermes is the same exact character.
Yep.
It's the same philosophy. There's the Emerald Tablets of Hermes Trismegistus, and then there's the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. If you actually start chronologically watching this stuff, even looking at the biblical record of things, that, the Jewish people were spending time in Egypt, and then after that, when John started writing Revelation, when they started turning into the Christians, they were all getting pushed into Greece and everything, and they were pushing Christianity to Greece. So it's it doesn't seem that far off, because that's the way all this philosophy has traveled anyways. Whether it's a cult, whether it's any type of religion, it all started off in this one pocket, and it all shifted from ancient Egyptian philosophy into Greek philosophy, because one inspired the other. And then we've all seen the train that follows after that, where all of the Roman stuff basically mirrored all the Greek stuff. So
yeah,
the more that I've dived into the weird aspects of the occult, that philosophy does not seem far off, at all. Even getting into the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which might be something I cover on a future episode, because I want to try to check into the validity of it a little bit. It even kind of mentions coming from ancient societies. It mentions a great flood and everything. So all these narratives stay exactly the same, dude. It's super duper weird. And it seems it's just different people reinterpreting the philosophy differently.
Yeah, and again, we've been, very much trained to think about history and time in like a linear A, B, C, D fashion. And this guy's basically saying, no, it wasn't Egypt, then Greece, then Rome, then yada, yada, yada. He said all this basically happened at the same time, and it occurred in what we would call the Middle Ages. So not nearly as long ago as the historical record would indicate. But getting back to Jesus, I told you we were going to talk about him. So probably the most controversial aspect of Fomenko's writings is he says that the figure of Jesus Christ never actually existed. And he was kind of just a composite figure that was based off of a bunch of different individual figures. Some of them being Andronicus the First, who was the Byzantine emperor from the year 1183 to 1185. Also, the Old Testament prophet of Elisha, which I think is kind of funny. Like Jesus is based off of an Old Testament prophet. Just kind of weird. But also Pope Gregory the Seventh, and also the Chinese Emperor Jingzong. And Fomenko says that differences in language and points of view and time frames when these historical records were written can largely account for the differences in the historical records of these individual figures. So take that
just
as
to throw
you will.
this into with some of the stuff that I've been diving into some Gnostic texts. There's actually beliefs that Jesus is the same figure as Thoth and Hermes also, which is like the seeker of knowledge and the one that brings knowledge to the people, like, which again, getting into some more weird stuff, like it's just like a reoccurring philosophy, and you get into like the occult aspect of like Christ consciousness and everything. And as I was mentioning on a recent show, some people may consider it blasphemous, but is it possible that Jesus and a lot of these like historical figures spent time in Egypt, which they definitely did, around this area, and actually had an understanding of like Hermetic philosophy, and that was actually the root of what we're looking at is like Christianity and Judaism?
Yeah, I mean, no matter what we're talking about, whether it be magic or occult learnings or religion or anything like that, it basically seems like Egypt, or what we call Egypt and the Egyptian Empire, is kind of patient zero for a lot of this stuff.
I mean, honestly, I'm starting to fall into the belief that, again, it can go two ways. Like, I definitely want to believe in the possibility of entities and all these different creatures and these, like, beings that seem to be something that's, like, bigger or something that's beyond us. But the more that I seem to dive into a lot of this, like, ancient philosophies, particularly in Egypt, it seems like, or Egypt, Greece, I guess even the Roman stuff, it more so seems like there were these characters that existed before time, which would kind of get into that theory that you were just mentioning.
Well, that's also like
just
archetypes and Jungian type stuff at that point.
Yeah, they were just people that existed, and they became something bigger than what they were. Like, they created a philosophy that was bigger than them. They created something that was bigger than them. And people started retelling these stories, and these people turned into these godlike entities from the retelling of stories. Because, like I said, Thoth, you look into that, and it sounds like he's just a man that people turned into something bigger. And you get into the Emerald Tablets, and it gets into the Atlantean shit, where he basically just says, like, I'm a typical Atlantean here to bestow knowledge. I'm no different than anybody else. Like, if I had advanced knowledge, if you had advanced knowledge, you would look like a god to the people that don't have advanced knowledge too. So it gets into this like weird philosophy behind that whole stuff that, again, I think that it's possible that a lot of these figures are just retellings of people that exist, that the story became bigger than the man, if that makes any sense.
No, definitely. I mean, again, game of telephone throughout years and centuries, who knows, what the little nugget of truth at the bottom of all those tales are. And I think it's definitely one of those situations where more than one thing could be true at the same time. There could be these entities and these creatures and all that. And then a lot of it could just be basically glorified fairy tales based off of these archetypes that, again, just after years and centuries of retelling, get accepted as fact and as history.
Not to mention, when you start getting into all this like new agey, like occult stuff, you get into the people just saying, oh, I'm a reincarnation, I'm a reborn of this, I'm a reborn of that. So then you have people that are like carrying on the philosophy, which it's kind of like that whole idea that, you create like a brand so that the brand lives on beyond you. So if you have this like figure that you like stand behind, that you're like the reincarnation of this figure, then you can rebrand the philosophy, and it doesn't matter who's standing in that place. It's like a rebranding of the figure, just like how you would with like a company. Like it's like a weird thing to think about, but if anybody pops up and they say that they're this figure, there's going to be a portion of people that follow them like they are 100% that figure, even if there is no validity to it.
Well, hey, I mean, any true crime documentaries or stuff about cults, I mean, anybody who's crazy out there and like espousing that there is some entity reincarnated, there's people dumb enough to believe them out there. So.
I also think there's a matter of, with a lot of these like old philosophers, that there's a lot of respect for the people that originally started the school of thought. So I think a lot of the intention may have been that, there was the original person that created the school of thought. And then there's other people that extended on that school of thought. And those people that extended on that school of thought didn't see it as their thought. They saw it as it was extending on somebody else's philosophy. So they put it as like their philosophy. So I feel like there's a lot of times where you'll have like these figures that will look at like they were doing things for like 1,000 years, for example, but they weren't. It was just a matter of they started a school of philosophy and then their initiates afterwards carried it on, keeping it under their name to keep respect for the fact that this was the school of thought that they created.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's the case with a lot of the Hermes, Trismegistus, and Hermeticism, is like basically this was writings that were attributed to this figure that, may have existed in some way, shape, or form, but it's kind of just a school of thought, and the followers of this school of thought attributed a lot of the writings to this figure. At least that's what I recall from when I was doing research on the Freemasons.
Yeah, and it pulls from so many different places, like I said, because there's like the Thoth aspect, there's like the Hermes aspect. So it's like, Hermes Trismegistus is supposed to be born 3 times, thrice great. It's supposed to be like the 3rd reincarnation. Like, again, there's people that even believe that Jesus was like the 4th reincarnation of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus. Like, it was just a carrying on of this philosophy. So, yeah, just something weird to think about. I don't mean to totally sidetrack, but I'm sure we'll get more into that next week. But
all right, so before we get too deep in the weeds, I'll jump back into the notes about new chronology here. So, again, this theory has been widely dismissed by scholars and historians. And the main piece of criticism is that Fomenko was like cherry picking evidence that in a vacuum would support this theory, but like blatantly ignoring this huge body of evidence that would contradict his theory. And critics also point to the fact that this theory is not really compatible with our accepted scientific dating methods and astronomical occurrences. Again, Fomenko just, throws all that out the window. He doesn't care that, his theory doesn't line up with that because he says that's not true. But anyway, critics also point to the fact that the theory is overly Russocentric, meaning that it places Russia at an elevated level of importance in world history, which kind of gets back to, what you were saying earlier about, do they have this vast library and these archives of human history and whatnot? But
as they say in the occult, everything is but a half truth. There is a speck of truth to every lie.
Well, hey, that's true just across the board, isn't it?
So I'm not going to deny that Russia probably has some information that the U.S. doesn't want us to have. But the question is, what is the information?
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right, so this theory was popularized by a Russian chess grandmaster named Garry Kasparov. And it's been said that, quote, the theory might have quietly blown away in the wind tunnels of academia, if not for Kasparov's writing in support of it. So basically, the idea is that Fomenko had like this harebrained scheme, basically, and this well thought of Russian grandmaster kind of endorsed this idea, and then that gave it more staying power and validity than it otherwise would have had. So kind of wrapping
just
up.
To throw this in there too,
yeah,
like ahead. I had mentioned when Ari had covered it, he supposedly had like extra information that supposedly like kind of pushed this philosophy from the Kremlin. So again, going into the whole thing with psyops, is it also possible that the reason why he was so stuck hard in his opinions is because he, quote, couldn't show people the information that he knew, but the information that he knew may have just been false information to begin with?
Yeah, very possible. And if this guy was a well thought of, well respected Russian chess grandmaster, it's definitely possible that he could have been privy to some information that the common Russian citizen was not. So I mean, that's an interesting detail and an interesting way of looking at it, I think.
Well, not a better person to psyop too than somebody that's respected by the community for being intelligent.
Yeah.
Just want to throw that out. A mathematician and a chess master. Perfect people, right?
So kind of summarizing these first two sections, the phantom time theory and new chronology, they differ a lot in their details and the specifics. Basically, phantom time theory proposes that the Middle Ages, didn't actually fucking exist at all. And new chronology proposes that the Middle Ages did exist, but most of world history actually took place in that period of time. So again, the details, specifics are different, but at the end of the day, it's both that, these huge chunks of time have been artificially added to our calendar for political and religious reasons.
I mean, I will throw in the fact that it seems like the main area of time where things really started to get documented was medieval times. So before that, I mean, things weren't really getting written down until a little bit. I mean, even like the Bible wasn't really starting to get written down until what, like at least like 100 years after the events supposedly happened. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, up until medieval times, stuff wasn't chronologically put in order like how we thought it was. So, I mean, I feel like it is still possible that anything before medieval times you could definitely mix around. And if people were doing it during medieval times, that just kind of adds another layer to it of like, oh, this was already said by these people. Like it adds a lot more validity to the possibility that sometime at least before medieval times could have been manipulated.
Yeah.
I mean, even within medieval times, because most of what we look at for medieval times documentation is simply people writing stuff down. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's basically the core tenet of Fomenko's theory and his ideas is that everything that happened before the year 1600, you really can't trust. And it's largely falsified or, best case scenario, misinterpreted or misrepresented.
I will throw this out at least for the sake of his theory. Obviously, you can't hide all of this like stuff that supposedly like exists from that time, like weapons, like shields, like all this type of stuff. But the events themselves could easily be manipulated. I want to put that out there. Like, just because we have documentation that this time era it did exist, it doesn't mean that the events of that time era could not have been manipulated. Because, I mean, even just to throw this one in there, we look at the events of, like, Helena of Troy and all that stuff as, like, as it was fact. Or, like, even the whole thing about the Trojan horse, like, it was fact. But we look back into it and realize that it was Homer that was writing about a time before when he was around. And he was writing about the things that he thought would have happened from, like, these ancient ruins and things. So it's, like, even some of the stuff that we look at as history is stories being retold. And it's a matter of people saying, yes, this actually happened, or no, this didn't actually happen, but there's still confusion within that. Like, again, the Trojan horse event, there's no actual documentation that actually happened as an event, even though we know that time period happened.
Yeah, I mean, isn't there some saying, and I'm going to butcher this and paraphrase it, but it's something to the effect of history is just the lies that everybody agrees on or something of that nature. So I mean,
exactly,
that's pretty much what we're talking about here.
I mean, in every single story, of course, there's two sides to it. So, you look at something like, this country was doing something positive, but from the other perspective, that country was doing something negative. So every single story is double-sided. And, just because you believe that you were on the right side of history doesn't mean that you were. It just means that the people that won the event wrote themselves in as being on the right side of history.
Yeah, for sure.
Events can easily be changed, even in modern day. I mean, shit, look at all the weird conspiracies with almost any assassination attempt that happens. We still know no fucking information on it, and we're looking at it like it's historically documented events. Like, 100 years from now, like, these things are going to exist as folklore because we still don't have any hard proof on a lot of the weird stuff that's happened.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that gets into sticky questions about, like, how much should we trust history? But, I mean, what other avenue do you have? I mean, either you're going to be the crazy guy who says no, history is fake, or you're going to kind of accept a lot of this stuff. So I mean, where's the correct answer on that kind of continuum there?
See, my opinion on it, and this is what I've always tried to do at least, is like, this is what I believe is the history, but I'm always open to changing what I believe could have been the history with more information. And I think that that's a really, really hard line, even though it sounds really, really simple for scholarly people to do, is to say with more information, the timeline can change because they don't want to change that timeline. Like, that's the way that anybody should consider it, I think, is that these are the things that we know that happen, but it doesn't mean that they have to stick to that if we have more information.
Well, I think that's, just a good way to be even not about history, just in general, is, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to grow and change and look at things differently with more information. So, I mean, that's just what we should do as human beings. But, in our current climate where, you have to be toes in the sand about religion and politics and, gender identities and all this type stuff. I mean, it gets very hard for people to say, no, it's okay to change your mind when you get more information about things.
I mean, especially you got to think about the whole money factor of like rewriting the history books, like rechanging every single document that's ever been written on this thing. But I mean, talking about some positives, hopefully with this, tech future, maybe it is possible that if textbooks aren't necessarily textbooks anymore and you're actually looking at them on a digital screen, yes, the information can be changed and that can be a negative thing. But on a positive thing, maybe if we get to a point where we actually want everybody to have information about the history of humanity, maybe in this, utopian Tesla type future, then, maybe we'd be able to update information as we had more information because we wouldn't have to update books. We just simply update it in the computer system or the archive. But again, that can also be completely compromised if it gets put in the hands of the wrong people.
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly how it's going to play out.
Yeah, it sounds like 1984 now that I'm thinking about it. Everything sounds like a good idea in practice, but you got to consider that almost every single thing will be corrupted with people. So the worst possible scenario you can think of will eventually happen.
All right, you want to do a break here?
Yes, sir.
All right, so jumping back in, now we are going to talk about Tartaria a little bit. And as we were talking about a little bit at the beginning, this is a topic that seemed to really make the rounds in like the conspiracy, paranormal, whatever circles a couple years ago. Again, not something we've gone super in-depth with on the show. As Shayn said, there's so much information out there about this subject, so I kind of just wanted to briefly touch on it, more so as an introduction to our next topic than anything else. But anyway, I thought I'd at least kind of hit the high water marks for this.
I'll make sure I keep quiet for this one because otherwise I'll open up a whole other can of worms, and we can do that on a different day possibly.
All right. So allegedly, the concept of Tartaria and the Tartarian Empire is that there's this technologically advanced lost civilization / empire that was based in what is now modern day Russia. And supposedly the theory originated as a pseudo-scientific Russian nationalism, and it was originally popularized by a Russian occultist named Nikolai Levashov. And of course, it was further popularized, through Fomenko and his like whole new chronology and all that good stuff.
We need to get a friend who speaks Russian, who lives in Russia, because to me, at least. Okay, so we talk about conspiracies and conspiracy shows, and it seems like most conspiracies are like based in the U.S. Like even UK conspiracy shows talk about the U.S. and everything like that. But Russia, bro, they seem like they're a fucking treasure trove just as much as the U.S. with like conspiracies, weird cover-ups, history. And I feel like the only way you'll ever get a full picture of this is if you actually have like a conspiracy nut who lives in Russia. We need to find this person. If we have a listener out there who's a conspiracy nut from Russia, like I want to hear like the deep, weird fucking conspiracies that nobody outside of Russia knows, because I know they got some crazy shit.
Well, it's because all the information going in or out have been suppressed for like fucking decades at this point. I mean, we thought Rocky solved all that shit in Rocky 4, but apparently he didn't.
We'll have to open up some type of like secret encrypted way to be able to talk to actually get this information out, because you can't use Discord anymore because they've been compromised. They want picture IDs and shit. So we'll figure it out. We'll get this information out of Russia and we'll start talking about these weird conspiracies, man.
Yeah, Shayn, why don't you get right on that?
Yeah, all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'll have the FBI showing up at my door saying that I'm involved with Russia and that I'm actually a red agent or something.
You're going to be rigging elections over there.
I'm already getting flagged on YouTube now.
All right, so jumping back in, so supposedly this Tartarian Empire was able to achieve world peace and develop unlimited clean energy, and just basically it was euphoria and heaven on earth and just this height of human evolution and achievement.
The Tesla future, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Yeah. It's like the ideal, exactly what you think of with that.
And a lot of people point to like this architecturally and architectural and technological advanced buildings that this society or this empire created. And they point to buildings all over the world, like the Great Pyramid or the White House, or even some of the buildings that were built for the 1915 World's Fair in San Francisco. And there's a lot of weird connections between like World's Fair and Tartaria and a lot of conspiracies and stuff there that I'm not really going to get into right now, but there's a lot to unpack there if you guys are interested in it. But anyway, this theory kind of says that all these different buildings were all created by this Tartarian empire, and that, you know, all these beautiful old Capitol buildings in like third world countries or in rural states, like back in the 1800s, they had these beautiful domed Capitol buildings and like star forts and all these really, really advanced buildings that they say, you know, shouldn't, quote unquote, have been able to have been manufactured in those time periods. But anyway, much of the evidence for this empire supposedly has been destroyed or covered up. And one of the main aspects of this theory is that a lot of this evidence was destroyed in mud floods. And I'm not going to get too deep into the whole mud flood thing, but some people say that, quote, many buildings across the world have architectural elements like doors, windows, and archways submerged many feet below ground. And a common thing that people point to in this theory is that secret societies or the Freemasons kind of found these old Tartarian buildings and claimed them for their own. And so it's free masonry. Like they found these buildings and they were free, and then they started using them. And people also say that World War II and even World War I to a certain extent was basically used as like this ruse to destroy evidence of these Tartarian buildings. So is there anything you want to jump in with before I close this section out?
I just wanted to throw in something weird that I was hearing about star forts the other day. So I don't know when the whole like idea of like star forts supposedly popped up, but like historically speaking, it's kind of like a weird concept because we essentially went from castles to star forts. Like it seems like just a really, really weird jump, which I know is part of like the whole like idea with like the star forts. But essentially the whole idea with star forts was with castles, you had like the four cornered walls. So you'd get barricaded inside and you wouldn't be able to get out. And there would be like these hard points where people would be able to like stay up against the wall and be able to start like making points of entry to be able to get in. So the whole idea with like star forts is that everything goes to these points. So you can essentially, the entire way that people are trying to move up the wall, you can essentially like braid them with arrows. You can braid them with shots, with cannon fire. So there's none of these like points where they can essentially try to like stay and fix at and start trying to like barricade through the wall. So it's just like a weird concept that we went from like castles to star forts like instantly. And it just seems like a really like hard jump as far as like architecture goes, from like a square box to like this in-depth concept about like how a star fort would function with no hard points where like intruders couldn't come up to it and like barricade the walls down. Like it's so fucking weird, dude.
Well, and that's basically like one of the main ideas of this theory is that, you know, these societies and places all over the world that at this point in time should have, you know, been, you know, very, very different, like not had a whole lot of communication, all came up with these same architectural ideas, whether that be, you know, the domed Capitol buildings or the star fort. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned basically we made this jump, you know, automatically. And you know, why is that? You know, these people that, you know, believe in Tartaria, they have an answer to that. So.
And even jumping into some other weird stuff, talking about these like dome structures. I mean, look at the dome structures that existed during Rome that are still standing. Like the ceilings aren't collapsing. There's no pieces of anything falling down, nothing. And we can't even build that kind of shit today. But I will throw in the fact that I was hearing something about they used a particular type of like volcanic ash within like the concrete. And the whole idea was that as it starts to crumble, it basically will like reshape itself and become stronger as it starts to crumble. So just like a weird thing that maybe there is an easy explanation to it, but like weird jump, man. We went from like, again, these crumbling castles to these structures that are still standing to this day that we can't even like build like that now. And now we have these like dome structures that, you know, after a couple of years, you got to tell people to look out because pieces start falling from the ceiling.
That was a really good thing that you said in passing. Remember the whole volcanic ash thing. That's going to come up in just a little bit.
I'm a treasure trove for good information without realizing it today. Hey.
All right. So closing out this section, again, Tartaria, widely dismissed and debunked by scholars and historians, supposedly. Experts point to the fact that Tartaria, or Tartary, as it's also known, was like an established historical name for the region of like Central Asia and Siberia. So basically like the area of Russia. And also that the conspiracy theory, quote, ignores well-documented accounts of Tartary within the history of Asia. But like we said, in recent years, this theory gained a lot of popularity in like conspiracy circles. It moved well beyond like its original like Russian nationalist roots. And it also ties into the next section, which is the thing I was most excited to talk about, and probably something that our listeners might not be as familiar with. So now...
I want to throw in something real quick about maps first.
Yep, go ahead.
So as far as maps go, I want to throw this in that, again, diving into some of like the old like scribe stuff when people are talking about like creatures and things, they always refer to like, oh, these creatures came from India. So when you actually look into it, you realize that they basically would say anything that existed past this point is India. So it doesn't tell you exactly the location. It just says everything beyond that is India. So I think that's a lot of what happened with Tartaria, is that it was like, this is the documented area. Everything past that, that's Tartaria. So like on these maps, you see Tartaria, but it's not saying like, yes, this was a civilization that existed here. It just kind of meant that like everything beyond that area is Tartaria. And like maps are such a weird thing that even the idea that we look at as the modern map isn't actually an accurate map. Like the map that you see in school, looking at that simply, they make South America just as big as Greenland. But if you look at it, South America is actually bigger than North America, and Greenland is actually really, really small. Like, just because of the way they have to quote flatten the map, which a lot of flat earthers get into all this type of shit and everything, but like the map that you know isn't actually like the right proportions for how the world is actually structured. So even in present day, dude, this is where all these debates come in, where people get into Tartaria, is that we still can't fully like establish like a map that's like, yes, this is the established map to this day.
Yeah. So
the only way you can really see it is on Google Maps, and the only way that it seems to work is if you're able to make it into a sphere, because you make it flat and it just, the proportions don't work.
Yeah, so two thoughts there. Yeah, like you said, the Mercator projection, which is like the accepted map that everybody uses, and there's probably a lot of reason for this. It definitely puts North America and Europe in like an increased level of prominence, just size-wise. Like
there's the whole Christian aspect of it, that they say a lot of the map makers were Christians, so they try to make the Christian nations bigger. I've always heard that theory too.
Yeah, like the continent of Africa is huge, it's massive, but like it looks way smaller on the Mercator projection than it really is. But the other point I was going to make is, yeah, kind of like you were saying, people will point to the fact of, oh, this says Tartaria on this map as like evidence that this civilization existed, when, like you said, it was just kind of a term for that area, or, you know, like the Great White North, or, you know, something like that, just like a colloquial term for this region of the world.
I mean, think about these map builders these map makers back in the day. They didn't have the means that we had. They were looking from the ground. So even looking at these old maps where people say, oh yeah, they made an ice wall, that's fucking definite. These guys were looking at the ground. When they're on a boat, they just saw a giant fucking wall of ice. So, of course, they're going to write that in the map as, here's a fucking ice wall, because they had no way of going over it, going and seeing what was beyond it, whatever. So, like, a lot of people like to sit here and say that, like, this is fact from these old maps. But it's like, dude, the old maps, if you look at the old map of your state, I guarantee you they look like complete shit. But when it comes to this exact thing, you're going to say, yup, this is the hard facts because of this old map. Like, old maps are fascinating, but, like, let's stop trying to use them as, like, documented facts of things, because we know that maps are up for debate anyways.
All right, so moving on from the Shane Jones cartology corner over here,
arguing about maps.
I guess
I'm sorry,
cartography, wouldn't it? That's
somewhat. Yeah,
I think that's the art of map making. But anyway, so this next,
I was just thinking recently about this. I went to a museum. They had maps of Michigan, and it's just looking at them every 50 years, like they're ridiculous. Like the proportions of Michigan is hilarious.
All right, so this next section was the thing I was most excited to talk about, and I kind of tried to structure this episode where we started from what I would consider the most grounded topic to like the most out there one. But this one's a doozy. It's probably something that not as many of our listeners are as familiar with, but it's something I've really wanted to talk about for a long time, and I find super interesting. So now we're going to talk about the little season concept.
I'm glad that you've done this one, because I've heard this a lot in passing, but I'm glad that you've you put this into the
Oh,
show.
I'm
so thank you.
obsessed with this. So anyway, the little season is a eschatological concept, and eschatology is the study of end times or like the end of the world. But anyway, this concept suggests that the biblical tribulation and the return of Jesus Christ has already happened, and that we're living in a quote unquote little season in which Satan is allowed to rule and deceive the nations. And this theory is based primarily on the book of Revelation, specifically chapter 20. And I'm going to read some verses from that chapter. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm not trying to cherry pick the Bible here. I just picked out some of the passages that I thought were most crucial to this concept. So we're going to start in Revelation chapter 20, verse 1. And it says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into a bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him. And he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season." So that's the verse where this kind of concept and theory gets its name. Moving on to verse 4. "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither received his mark." So that's like the mark of the beast, 666, all that stuff. "Upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part of the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sands of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and encompassed the camp of the saints about the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever." Do you have anything to add at that point?
Not at this point yet.
Okay, so
Other than the fact that Revelation is fascinating.
Oh, it's trippy, dude. So kind of just a rough timeline of events of the little season is the tribulation, Jesus' return, supposedly occurred in approximately the years 60 to 70 AD. And this coincided with the first Jewish-Roman war and the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire. This theory also says that the Roman Emperor Nero was actually the biblical Antichrist figure. And people say this because he widely persecuted Christians. He was known to be like the most anti-Christian emperor of the time. He was the first Roman emperor to put his face on coins and money. And he also made this decree where he required a signed document from the government of Rome to buy and sell goods or trades in Rome. And a lot of people have pointed to those two things as that's kind of like the mark of the beast. You can't buy and sell, trade, whatever, without receiving this mark. Also, it's like on historical record that the year 66 AD was like this really weird year. And there was all these volcanic eruptions all over the known world. And there's like documented instances of signs and wonders in the sky. And we're going to talk about this idea again in a minute. But anyway, so after this supposed tribulation period of 60 to 70 AD, Jesus began his millennial reign, which was 1,000 years where Jesus like literally came down to earth and ruled the earth like in person. And this really connects in with like the Tartarian Empire stuff where, they supposedly achieved world peace and had all this advanced technology and architecture. All that stuff could be attributed to things that were built and designed during Christ's millennial reign, where we lived in like this glorified, perfect world.
I guess you could get into the whole Tartaria idea with like the whole idea of deception then. If you're talking about like the chronological calendar being destroyed, if the Tartarian times was the time of Jesus, then of course, you'd want to destroy and pretend like that never happened.
Exactly.
So yeah, I could get how people can
make that jump.
Can get into
yeah.
that.
So after this millennial reign of Christ, according to the Bible verses, Satan is then released from the bottomless pit and allowed to deceive the nations. And at this point, Jesus recedes to the camp of saints, which is, like this big cube structure, like this enormous structure that supposedly Jesus and his saints are residing in. Some proponents of this theory say that it's actually located in the North Pole, which connects back to a lot of other conspiracies and things we've talked about on the show. And then, after Satan was loosed and began deceiving the nations, the secret societies and the Freemasons and whatnot took control of these buildings and these, Capitol buildings and forts and whatnot. And that kind of ties back into Tartaria as well. But supposedly we are still living in this little season under Satan's deception. And whenever this little season ends, supposedly, Jesus will return again, and this is going to be like the final judgment. And then like the Battle of Armageddon, the Battle of Gog and Magog is going to happen. And we talked about Gog and Magog a little bit when we were talking about like Skull and Bones and the Freemasons and all the kind of occult ties to those terms and those ideas. And at this point, Satan supposedly will gather his forces to battle Jesus and the camp of saints. Again, some people think this is going to happen at the North Pole, and other people say this is going to be some sort of like Project Bluebeam type situation when this happens, and the powers that be, the governments of the world, whatever you want to call it, are going to frame this as like an alien invasion, and they're basically going to get the governments of the world to attack Jesus and the camp of saints if this happens. So a lot of wild out there things with this theory. Just some miscellaneous things. So again, approximately 700 years have been added to our calendar, according to a lot of proponents of this theory. So we've got, time being added to the calendar again. And it's really not been 2,000 years since Jesus lived, but more like 1,300 years. And some people even say, like, if you do the math and go back to like the whole year 60 to 70 AD thing, the little season would have began in roughly 1776, which is pretty wild.
Which, especially getting into some of like the weird occult ties, as far as like when they were saying like, oh, what are we going to pick as like the head of our nation? And they had this like, they're all going to say a turkey, blah, 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 blah. And this dark cloaked figure came in and basically said an eagle and then disappeared and nobody knew who he was. Like, it's super weird when you start getting into the occult aspects of the starting of our nation and hearing these stories of like these dark figures coming in and like throwing ideas for starting the nation. Like, again, super fucking weird, man. Matter of perspective, I guess.
Well, and also like all the documented connections between like the founding of America and how heavily based in Rome and Roman history and Roman ideals it was. It kind of lines up if you really, really think about it.
I mean, dude, even look at the Statue of Liberty and then look at like the medieval renditions of Lucifer.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the face structure is exactly the same. Like, you won't unsee it. Like, the Statue of Liberty doesn't look like a female face once you see what more than likely it was probably modeled after.
Well, and like the broken chain around the Statue of Liberty's foot and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, a ton of stuff to look into.
Holding the flame, the light bearer, the light bringer. The morning star.
Yep. Yeah, so, I mean, all that symbolism to me is just fascinating, and a lot of this little season stuff just ties so much into that kind of stuff that I love anyway.
And you want to get even more into some Roman ideas. What is the what was the Statue of Liberty modeled after?
Supposedly,
if you're thinking about like Rome.
Well, other than Lucifer, I don't know. I'm not sure what you're getting at there.
Oh, it was the what was they called? What was the name of that giant structure where it was like the giant person that was standing over? It was one of the seven wonders of the world.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The name's escaping me. No, I didn't realize that was supposed to be like the inspiration for the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up real quick. I want to make sure I say the right name. I think it's like Colossia of Rhodes. I was almost there. I was almost correct. But like, I'm gonna bring this up on the screen, and then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, man. Screen share. So here's a perfect image. Look at that. Boom.
Yeah.
See, that's what it was modeled after. It had the same like headdress structure, all that stuff. So it's like, again, are we just talking about the same figures recycled constantly? Kind of seems like it.
Well, and yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff with like the Statue of Liberty being a gift from the French and all that. And yeah, there's a lot of weird Statue of Liberty stuff you can get into as well.
But again, I think it's like it's exactly kind of proving the point that you were saying earlier, that people say, oh, it's this character. Oh, it's this character. Oh, it's this character. It's like, yeah, all these characters are supposed to be the same thing. It's just recycling the names, which is, we've talked about that with creatures. We talk about that with all this stuff, that as time goes on, people just rename things and it's the same exact thing.
Yeah, like we always say.
Nothing new under the sun.
We're all talking about the same thing here, but a lot of, like I said, these theories just take that to like level 11. But anyway, so jumping back into the little season, it's on historical record that the year 536 AD was known widely as like the worst year in human history. Again, there are volcanic eruptions all over the globe. Supposedly, the sun went dark for like 18 months straight. There was widespread plague and famine. A huge percentage of the world's population died. And a lot of people have suggested that this was actually that same event and the same year of the tribulation event in like the year 60 to 66, somewhere in there AD. And again, it's kind of timeline calendar shenanigans why these are regarded as two separate times and two separate events. So like we kind of touched on before, proponents of this theory also say that like a lot of this Tartarian architecture and technology could have been stuff that was created in the millennial reign, and that it wasn't mud floods that destroyed a lot of this stuff, but it could have been ash from these volcanic eruptions. Or something that came into my mind as you were talking, these volcanic eruptions happened during this tribulation period. Afterwards, when Christ came back and did his millennial reign, there was all this volcanic ash around, and they put it into the bricks and whatnot of these buildings. So I think that was a great point you brought up, something that, I did not see in any of my research, but played in perfectly with this.
Something to think about, though. Yeah, where exactly were they getting all this volcanic ash from that they were using to make this structure? Because, again, if this works so well, why aren't we using it today? Is it because we don't have the means of having that much volcanic ash to be able to actually use this?
Yeah.
Again, it kind of fits in with the theory. Like, where did it all come from? Like, why was it so readily available?
Yeah, so really, if that is true, that all these beautiful old architectural structures have volcanic ash in the stones and whatnot, like that's a really big feather in the cap of these type theories, I feel.
And like I said, I mean, it's a matter of perspective too, that I feel like no matter what way you want to look at these events, the reason why these ideas exist is because there is some type of speck of truth to them. So the whole Tartarian thing, I feel like there's, no matter what, there probably is some speck of truth. There's something wrong with the calendar. There's some weird events that may not have been actually documented, but just because of all of these ideas, it adds speculation to it. Like, we don't necessarily know which direction to go with it because there's just all this layered information and it's just so hard to dissect. But there's clearly some speck of truth to all of these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of rounding out tonight's episode, proponents of this little season theory, they also point to several Bible verses in which Jesus and his disciples discussed his return, like as if it was an imminent event, like something that was not going to take place in, 2,000 years plus, but like in, the days of the people that lived at that time. I'm not going to read the verses just for time's sake. If you guys want to look them up, some of them are Matthew 16:28, Matthew 24:34, Mark 13:30, Luke 9:27, and Revelation 1:7. And a lot of this, kind of brings up interesting questions, I think, about like the literal interpretation of the Bible and kind of like taking Jesus at his word. A lot of people, and not to poo-poo organized religion or Christians or anything like that, but we'll kind of talk out both sides of their mouth. Like, sometimes you have to take the Bible at its literal word and no, it said Jonah was swallowed by a whale and it means that he was swallowed by a whale. And then other times it's, well, that was a different time. And like, that's not really what Jesus meant. So, I think those are like kind of tricky questions to get into with all this. And,
I want to throw in the fact that with a lot of this, like old documentations of things, like we've said a million times, like the language didn't necessarily line up with what they were saying, so they were trying to describe things with the best language that they possibly had at the time.
Yeah, like
I
say all the time, people describing indescribable things with the best language they have.
Exactly.
But so kind of rounding this out, a lot of this information I first came into contact with through Paul Stobbs, which is the Nephilim look like clowns guy. We talk about him all the time on the show. But he does a lot of work with this little season theory. He goes super duper in depth. So definitely check out his, various podcast appearances and his YouTube channel and things like that if you want more information about it. But,
I guess he's a perfect person to bring up because, this is the idea that I was going to try to make, that with a lot of this like ancient occult stuff, it's written in two ways. There's two ways to interpret things, and it's intended to be that way. You can interpret things literally, and you can interpret things as symbols for things. So a lot, again, of these people that were writing these documentations down of like the Bible, even Jesus, the things that he was studying a lot of this philosophy that was intended to be read two different ways. So again, that's one of the things that drives me crazy too, is that, people want to say this is literal and this is supposed to be metaphorical. But I think that almost everything in the Bible, almost everything in any piece of occult text that there ever has been existing in anything when it comes to enlightenment or any type of philosophy with this, I think that almost everything can be interpreted 2, 3, maybe even 4 different ways. Like there's no hard, definite way that any of it is supposed to be interpreted, and it's written in that manner.
Well, yeah. So this is a crude example, but I just recently reread The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And the first time I read that book, I was probably in high school. And like, I feel like when you're in high school, you're not old enough to read that book. And if you read it, just on the surface level, you're, that's a nice story about a fishing trip. But like every line of that book means something else. The lines about fighting the fish are about like fighting the world and the struggles of the world and like the world beating you down. So, and if this book by just a normal man has all those levels of nuance and every line of it means two at least things at the same time, why would we think these religious texts would not be the same way,
Not to mention the fact that you have to consider that a lot of these religious texts, people were intending for a lot of these things to be secret unless the right eyes saw them.
Occult,
so things
if
were
you will.
written, so that only certain people would read them a certain way, and that was the whole intention behind it. Like, I mean, even getting into another world world example, look at Animal Farm.
Yeah.
They make you read that in school, and it's like, most people see it as, it's just, it's like a kid's book you read in school. It's about, communism, but it's like done with animals. It's a kid's book. You go back and read that as an adult, and it's like everything can be interpreted 3 different ways. And you realize that like Animal Farm was never a fucking kid's book. And it's like, why did you read that in school? Because it was way beyond your level of understanding what the hell the guy was even talking about.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of books that we make kids read, they're not old enough to read them. And that might be largely by design. If we make these kids read these super deep, heady books when they're children, that's going to like ruin them on literature. And then they're not going to want to read when they get older and like uncover
That's
all
a weird
these
thing
concepts.
To think about with like 1984, Animal Farm, all these books that they consider to be like the books that they're going to be banned one day. It's like, why do they make kids read them in school? One, I mean, there's also the aspect that, like Brave New World is written by Aldous Huxley, and Aldous Huxley was linked in with a lot of like occult stuff.
There's a lot
but
to
on the other side
there.
of it, is it possible that they also, like you just said, you make kids read these books young so that and then they lose their interest, so that the deep philosophy that's in it that they're scared of, now people are just like, I read that book in school, I'm not interested.
Yeah, that book
and
sucks.
Like, it's a way of hiding it in plain sight.
Yeah. All right, you want to take
the people that see it, but the people that don't, it just becomes a book they read in school and nobody fucking cares.
It's a cult.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take our last break here?
Yes, sure.
All right, you good?
Yeah. So just going forward, I don't know how many you added into this, but I've only been doing 3 ad breaks.
This is the third one.
Okay,
we
perfect.
just went a little long with that last section.
Yeah, for the future, only 3 ad breaks,
been
but
doing
if
3.
you already got 3, that's perfect.
All right, so kind of closing out. I know we've gone a little long today, but there's a lot to unpack with this episode. And like I said, like
I still could have went in a million different directions. I was trying to hold myself back.
Each one of these topics could be its entire series, but kind of just some of my closing thoughts and conclusions and ideas. In regards to the little season thing, like I said, I'm obsessed with this topic. Like, I think it's so interesting. I think, as someone who grew up in church, I always struggled with like certain doctrines and teachings and certain aspects of Christianity and organized religion that so much of it just seemed like fear mongering and like basically just
controlled information.
Yeah, trying to control people with this, Jesus is going to come back at any second. You better, tighten up or, you're going to get left behind and all this sort of stuff that when you really dig into a lot of those doctrines and teachings, they're not remotely biblical. It's things that were like created relatively recently by, evangelists and things like that. But anyway, not to get too deep into all that, like this little season theory, like makes a lot of sense. And I think it really contextualizes a lot of the issues I always had with organized religion. And it makes a lot of pieces kind of fall into place. So, I mean, not to offend any of our listeners, not to sound sacrilegious, but like this is a theory that I just find fascinating. If, nothing else, not saying I'm like trusting my eternal soul to the little season theory or anything like that, but I think it's super interesting. I mean, when it comes to like Phantom Time and New Chronology and Tartaria, those, some of that stuff I find a little more difficult to believe that like conspiracies of that size and scope could be like successfully pulled off. But, like we talked about, our calendar is just a human construct. I think it's extremely likely that we're not actually living in the year 2026. It's just a matter of, what year are we actually living in? And at the end of the day, does that actually really matter? It's kind of like the flat earth thing. Like, okay, if flat earth was true, when we wake up tomorrow, it's not really going to change our lives at all. Like if this is not the year 2026, it doesn't really change our lives at all. So, these concepts and ideas that would like radically change our entire thought process and our entire existence, at the end of the day, they don't really change that much. So that's kind of just my take home points for a lot of this stuff. Do you have anything you want to leave us with on this one? Any kind of thoughts, conclusions, anything like that?
I'm kind of with you on the fact that, I don't know, like I said, I could put some validity into a lot of these different theories. I mean, there's still like a lot of like questions and doubts, obviously on both sides, but when you come into like the religious paradigm and you start getting into like the matter of control of information that especially like the early church had, for example, like if there's ever going to be a place
the current church is still controlling information.
That's what I'm saying. Like if there's ever going to be a spot where the year may have been messed up, information was controlled like that, my best guess is it was probably going to be when the foundation of the church was starting and they were actually starting to like say, this is documentation, this is fact, this is not. Like that was the like establishing point of like when we started saying like this is history, was like the formation of the early church. So if that anything was going to happen, like that was the time period it was going to happen in. So honestly, yeah, I put a lot of stock, whether or not there's the religious connotation to it or not, what you believe as far as like Satan coming back, like all this type of stuff. Like I still think that would have been the time, and it would have completely make sense that the people in charge of the calendar, the religion, all this stuff would have been altering information to make it fit exactly where they needed it to.
Absolutely. For, like we talked about, for political gains, for religious gains, like to me, it just makes too much sense that we're probably not living in the year 2026. Are we off by 700 years and Jesus already came back? I don't know, but I think it's super fun to think about. This was a fun episode to put together. Like I said, I've been dying to talk about the little season stuff. My original intention was to put this episode out in January to like coincide with the new year and calendars and things like that. I thought it would be a fun little connection, but we had to shift some things around in our own calendar, so that didn't quite work out. But anyway, like I said, if any of you guys out there want us to touch on any of these subjects again, definitely let us know, because there's a lot to unpack with all of these.
And I just want to throw this in there, of course, for anybody that, especially at the end, may have thought that we were talking bad about anybody's religion or anything like that. We don't intend it that way. Our whole thing, as we've seen with a million different things, is as soon as human control gets involved in something, there is
Absolutely.
going to be corruption that eventually happens, whether it's the government, whether it's the church, whatever, beyond your beliefs. If there's human control over something, there's going to be corruption that happens. So just because we're talking bad about the established church doesn't mean that we're talking bad about your religion, you as the church. We're just saying that the people in power, of course, are going to shift things around for their perspective. So hopefully nobody took any of that personally, because I know that we probably do have a good portion of religious guests out there. And again, just because, we are part of America doesn't mean that we're pro-American government. Like, that's how people need to kind of understand this thing. Like, just because you are religion doesn't mean that you have to fully stand behind everything that the people in power say.
Yeah, people
just
can
to
be
throw that
good
out there.
even if institutions are bad. So
Exactly.
But anyway, Shane, that's all I've got for tonight's episode. If you don't have anything else to add.
Well, if anybody might possibly be interested in supporting the show and all of the hard work behind it, some of the best ways that you guys can do that are, number one, going and checking out our Patreon. And as I've been mentioning recently, we moved it down to just one tier, and it is $2.50 a month. And with that, you guys get full access to everything that we got going on over there. And if you guys want to see what it's all about, you guys can try out the 7-day free trial. And hopefully, if you guys like it, you guys will stick around for a while.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store with the t-shirts starting at just $15.68 plus shipping. Wow.
Ooh-wee.
Oh, that was a good one.
And I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, one of the best ways that you guys can do that is by leaving a review or rating anywhere that you guys happen to listen to podcasts. And once we find it, we will give you guys a big shout out in the show. But as we usually say, what are the rules for that, Orin?
1 and 5 stars only.
And if you guys leave us 1 star, we will, of course, ridicule you. And if you guys leave us 5 stars, we'll, of course, give you guys a big shout out and love you guys forever.
And you guys can also share the show with your friends, your family, even your enemies. This might be a really good one to share with your enemies. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that this episode will piss off. So, yeah, shoot that to your enemies and people that you don't like.
Because grassroots support from you guys is the only way that podcasts like this grow. I want to sound like PBS. I had to throw that one in there.
You and only you can prevent forest fires.
Exactly. And if you guys want to keep up to date on the show, some of the best ways that you guys can do that are...
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and just do all the internet things. You guys know how the internet works.
And of course, you guys can catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And if you guys have some free time, check out our friends and sponsors of the show. We've got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. And we got our buddy Joe with Cryptoteology for, what is it, Shane?
Yo.
Wearable
cryptids.
Cryptids.
And our friends, don't forget to check them out with affiliate links. We got Dimension Devices and Sticker Mule with some additional discounts and credits available for you guys. With more information on that available down in the show description.
And as always, all this shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And as I tell you guys on every show, but I want to make sure that you guys know it and it sticks in your guys' minds forever. Always, always remain and stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
What in the hell is a mud flood?
Reality is more secret from us.
Bend over and I'll show you.
Whoa.
Reality is illusion.
Oh, everything's crooked. Reality is poison.